I'm Sage Hartwell, 34, and everything changed when I logged into my nephew's college savings account and saw a balance of $127. Not $127,000, just $127. For 10 years, I'd been depositing $500 every month into that 529 account, watching it grow through compound interest and market gains. It should have been enough to cover 4 years at any state university. Instead, there was barely enough for textbooks. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what I discovered next will show you why trusting family with money can be the biggest mistake of your life. I grew up in a small ranch house in Tucson with my younger sister Bryn and our parents, David and Linda Hartwell. Dad worked as an electrician for the city, coming home every evening with calloused hands and stories about fixing broken streetlights. Mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school down the street, her voice always slightly hoarse from talking over classroom chatter. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable. Dad had this ritual every Sunday morning where he'd spread the bills across the kitchen table, calculator in hand, making sure every dollar was accounted for. "Money doesn't grow on trees, girls," he'd say, the same phrase every week. "But if you're smart with it, it can grow into something bigger." When I was 22 and finishing my finance degree at Arizona State, our parents were driving home from their anniversary dinner at the Mexican restaurant where they'd had their first date. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit them head on. They died instantly, the police told us later, though I'm not sure that detail was supposed to be comforting. Bryn was 19, a sophomore studying communications at the community college, more interested in sorority mixers than spreadsheets. Suddenly, I wasn't just a recent graduate looking for entry-level positions. I was responsible for settling an estate, dealing with insurance companies, and making sure my little sister didn't fall apart completely. The house came with a mortgage we couldn't afford on our part-time jobs. Mom and Dad's life insurance covered the funeral and some bills, but there wasn't much left over. I took the first job I could find at a small financial planning firm in Phoenix, commuting an hour each way while Bryn finished school. She moved in with her boyfriend Marcus during her junior year, a guy she'd met in her business ethics class who seemed confident about money in a way that impressed her. He talked about investment strategies and market opportunities with the kind of authority that made you want to believe him, even when you couldn't quite follow his explanations. By the time Bryn graduated, she and Marcus were engaged. She was pregnant within 6 months of their wedding, which happened at a country club I couldn't afford, but somehow ended up paying for because Marcus's family had cash flow issues that month. Camden was born 3 weeks early, a tiny, wrinkled thing who cried constantly and required more medical attention than their insurance wanted to cover. I found myself writing checks for copays and baby formula, telling myself it was temporary help until they got established. Marcus had started what he called a financial consulting business, working with small clients who needed retirement planning and investment. He'd gotten his Series 7 license and rented a small office in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. Bryn worked as his office manager, handling appointments, while Camden stayed with a babysitter who charged more per hour. They seemed to be building something together, a family business that would provide stability for Camden. When Camden turned 7, I suggested starting a college fund. By then, I'd moved to a larger firm and was making decent money managing portfolios for middle-class families. I'd learned enough about compound interest to know that starting early would make a significant difference. "Let me handle the 529, told Bryn over dinner at her apartment, watching Camden color at the kitchen table. "I can set up automatic transfers and manage the investments. You and Marcus focus on your business." Marcus nodded approvingly, saying he appreciated me taking that responsibility off their plates. Bryn seemed relieved, admitting that college planning felt overwhelming when they were still figuring out month-to-month expenses. I opened the account that week, naming Camden as the beneficiary and myself as the account owner. Every month, $500 came out of my checking account automatically. I chose conservative growth funds, the kind that would steadily build value without too much risk. I sent quarterly statements to Bryn and Marcus, watching the balance grow from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands. By Camden's 10th birthday, we had crossed the $40,000 mark. By his 15th, we were approaching $90,000. I never told them the exact amount, just that it was growing nicely and would cover most of his college costs. 3 months ago, Camden turned 17 and started talking seriously about college applications. He'd maintained a 3.8 GPA and scored well on his practice SATs. He wanted to study engineering at Arizona State, the same school where I'd gotten my finance degree. When he mentioned tuition costs during a family barbecue, I assured him the money was there. "Don't worry about the finances," I told him, ruffling his hair. "That's what the college fund is for." That night, I decided to check the account balance to see exactly how much we had accumulated. I wanted to know if we could afford the full 4 years or if he'd need to supplement with student loans. The login page loaded normally. My username and password worked fine. But when the account summary appeared on my screen, I stared at the numbers for a full minute, certain there had been some kind of error. Where there should have been over $120,000, I saw $127. I refreshed the page twice, logged out and logged back in, even cleared my browser cache. The number remained the same. 10 years of deposits, 10 years of compound growth, 10 years of planning for Camden's future, reduced to less than the cost of a single textbook. The transaction history told a story I didn't want to believe. Starting 3 years ago, there had been systematic withdrawals. $2,500 in January 2022, $3,800 in March, $4,200 in June. The amounts varied, but the pattern was consistent. Every few months, money disappeared from Camden's college fund. Each withdrawal was authorized with what appeared to be my electronic signature, complete with the security codes that should have been known only to me. I printed out 2 years' worth of statements, spreading them across my dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. The math was devastating. Over 36 months, someone had stolen $89,000 from Camden's account. They'd been careful about it, never taking so much at once that it would trigger automatic alerts, but persistent enough to drain nearly everything I'd worked to build. The remaining $127 represented the interest earned on the small balance they'd left behind, probably to avoid closing the account entirely and alerting me to the theft. I called the investment company's customer service line, sitting on hold for 27 minutes while automated messages assured me my call was important to them. When I finally reached a human representative, a woman named Jennifer with a slight southern accent, she confirmed what I already knew, but didn't want to accept. Yes, Ms. Hartwell, I show multiple authorized withdrawals from account ending in 4487. The requests came through our secure online portal using your login credentials and were verified with the backup email address on file. I asked her to read me that backup email address. It's brynhartwell.consulting@gmail.com. I'd never created that email address. I'd never authorized it as a backup, yet somehow it had been added to my account 18 months ago. Jennifer walked me through the withdrawal process, explaining how someone would need both my login information and access to that backup email to authorize transfers. The system requires two-factor authentication for any transaction over $1,000, she said. We send a confirmation code to the backup email, and it must be entered within 10 minutes to complete the withdrawal. I asked if she could see the IP addresses where these authorizations had originated. After a pause, she told me the requests had come from a location in Phoenix, which narrowed it down to approximately 2 million people. I hung up and immediately called Marcus's office. His secretary, a woman who always sounded like she was chewing gum, told me he was with a client but could call me back within the hour. I told her it was urgent, family business that couldn't wait. She put me on hold, and Marcus picked up 3 minutes later. Sage, hey, what's going on? Bryn mentioned you'd been asking about Camden's college stuff. His voice had that practiced casualness that people use when they're trying to sound unconcerned about something that very much concerns them. I told him about the missing money, about the unauthorized withdrawals, and the mysterious backup email address. He listened without interrupting, making appropriate sounds of shock and dismay at regular intervals. That's horrible, he said when I finished. Identity theft is getting so sophisticated these days. Did you call the police? The FBI handles financial crimes like this. I found it interesting that he immediately knew which federal agency would investigate, but I didn't say that. Instead, I asked if he'd noticed anything unusual about their computer security lately, any strange emails or suspicious activity on their home network. Nothing comes to mind, Marcus replied, but I'll check with Bryn. She handles most of our household stuff, passwords and accounts and all that. You know how she is with organization. I did know how Bryn was with organization. She'd lost her social security card 4 times in college and had forgotten her own wedding anniversary 2 years running until Marcus started putting reminders in her phone. The idea that she was sophisticated enough to hack my investment account seemed unlikely, but not impossible. That evening, I drove to their house in Chandler, a subdivision of identical beige houses with red tile roofs and minimal landscaping designed to survive the desert heat. Camden answered the door, excited to see me as always. At 17, he'd grown tall and lean, with Marcus's dark hair and Bryn's easy smile. He hugged me with the unconscious affection of someone who'd never had reason to doubt family loyalty. Aunt Sage, Mom said you might help me practice for my driver's test this weekend. I promised we'd work on parallel parking, trying to keep my expression normal while my stomach churned with what I needed to discuss with his parents. Bryn emerged from the kitchen wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired, older than her 31 years, with small lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "Camden, go work on your homework," she said, steering him toward his room. "Sage and I need to talk grown-up stuff." Once he was gone, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Marcus told me about the college account. This is so scary. Who would do something like this?" I explained what I'd learned from the investment company, watching her face carefully for any tell, any flicker of recognition or guilt. She maintained perfect eye contact, asked appropriate questions, and expressed all the right emotions in all the right places. If she was acting, she was better at it than I'd ever given her credit for. When I mentioned the backup email address, she wrinkled her brow thoughtfully. "BrynHartwell.consulting? That's weird. I mean, that's obviously supposed to be me, but I never set up anything like that. Could someone have created a fake email to make it look like I was involved?" The question felt loaded, like she was testing how suspicious I was of her specifically. I told her that was certainly possible, that identity thieves often used familiar names and addresses to make their activities less noticeable. "The important thing now is figuring out how to get the money back," I said. "I'll file a police report tomorrow and start the insurance claim process, but these things can take months to resolve." Bryn nodded sympathetically, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We'll figure this out," she said. "Family sticks together, especially when someone tries to hurt us." Marcus joined us 20 minutes later, carrying a manila folder filled with what he called security documentation. Printouts of their computer's antivirus scans, screenshots of their email accounts, and a list of passwords they used for various financial sites. Everything looked legitimate, organized, and completely unhelpful. He sat across from me at their dining room table, occasionally glancing toward Camden's room to make sure we weren't being overheard. "I've been thinking about this all afternoon," he said. "The timing is suspicious. Camden just started talking seriously about college applications. Someone who knew about the account might have wanted to steal the money before he actually needed it." That observation struck me as oddly specific, like he'd put considerable thought into the psychology of the theft. I asked him to elaborate, and he explained that most financial crimes were opportunistic rather than random. Someone had to know the account existed, know roughly how much was in it, and have enough personal information about you to guess your security answers. This wasn't some stranger who picked your name out of a phone book. He was right. And that realization made my chest tighten with the anxiety I didn't want to acknowledge. The circle of people who knew about Camden's college fund was very small. Driving home that night, I found myself replaying every conversation I'd had about the account over the past 3 years. I'd mentioned it to my boss when explaining why I couldn't afford to join the office investment club. I'd discussed it with my accountant during tax season since 529 contributions could be deductible. I'd told my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, when she asked about saving for her grandson's education. But the people who knew the most details, who understood exactly how much money was involved and where it was kept, were the same people who'd been sitting across from me at that dining room table, expressing shock and concern about the theft. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for several minutes, engine off, trying to process what felt like a fundamental shift in reality. Either someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to steal Camden's college money while framing my sister, or the two people I trusted most in the world had been systematically robbing me for 3 years. Neither possibility seemed real, but one of them had to be true. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to my bank in Scottsdale. I needed to understand exactly how sophisticated this theft had been, and my investment company's customer service representative hadn't been able to answer the technical questions that kept me awake all night. Tom Reeves, the branch manager who'd helped me set up my first IRA, agreed to meet with me in his office. I spread the transaction histories across his desk while he pulled up my accounts on his computer system. "The backup email authorization happened on March 15th of last year," Tom said, scrolling through digital records. "It was added using your primary login credentials at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The request came from an IP address registered to a coffee shop in Tempe." He turned his monitor so I could see the detail. "Whoever did this knew your username, password, and enough personal information to answer the security questions correctly. Your mother's maiden name? The street you grew up on? Your first pet's name?" I stared at the screen, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. Bryn knew all of those answers. We'd grown up in the same house with the same golden retriever named Buster. She'd been there when Mom told stories about her childhood as Linda Morrison before she married Dad. but that didn't prove anything definitive. Family members often shared that kind of information casually over the years. I asked Tom if there was any way to trace the specific device used to make the changes. "Not unless law enforcement gets involved with a warrant," he replied. "But I can tell you this. Whoever set up that backup email knew exactly what they were doing. They waited 6 months before making the first withdrawal, probably to avoid triggering any immediate alerts. They varied the amounts and timing to look like irregular but legitimate educational expenses. Books, housing deposits, that sort of thing. This wasn't random. It was methodical. The drive to the Tempe coffee shop took 45 minutes in midday traffic. Blue Mountain Cafe occupied a corner space in a strip mall near Arizona State's campus, the kind of place where students camped out for hours with laptops and textbooks. I ordered a latte I didn't want and asked the barista, a girl with purple hair and multiple ear piercings, if they kept security footage from over a year ago. She laughed and told me they recycled their cameras every month. "We're not the FBI," she said. "We just make coffee." I sat at a table near the window, trying to imagine someone I knew sitting in this exact spot, using the free Wi-Fi to steal from Camden's future. The logical part of my mind kept insisting that Bryn wouldn't do this. She was disorganized and impulsive, not calculating and patient. She forgot birthdays and anniversaries, misplaced important documents, and could barely manage her own checking account without overdraft fees. The idea that she could execute a multi-year financial fraud seemed impossible, but Marcus was different. Marcus understood money, understood systems, understood how to manipulate both for his advantage. I'd always admired his confidence about investments and business strategies, the way he could explain complex financial concepts in simple terms. Now I wondered if that expertise extended to areas I'd never considered. I finished my latte and drove to the strip mall where Marcus rented his office space. The directory in the lobby listed Hartwell Financial Consulting in Suite 204, between Desert Rose Nails and Quick Tax Solutions. I took the elevator to the second floor and walked down a hallway that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and photocopier toner. Through the glass door marked with his name, I could see Marcus at his desk, talking on the phone while typing on his computer. His office was smaller than I'd expected, with 2 client chairs facing a desk covered in manila folders and financial newspapers. I waited in the hallway until he finished his call, then knocked on the glass. His face showed surprise when he saw me, followed quickly by something that might have been concern. "Sage, hey, come in. Any updates on the college account situation?" He gestured to one of the client chairs while settling back behind his desk. The space felt different than it had when I'd visited before, more cramped and somehow temporary, like he was ready to pack up and leave at any moment. I told him I'd been to the bank, learned about the IP address trace and the timing of the security changes. He listened with the appropriate expressions of interest and outrage, occasionally shaking his head or making sympathetic noises. When I mentioned the coffee shop in Tempe, something flickered across his face too quickly for me to interpret. "Tempe," he repeated. "That's weird. I mean, it's not that far from here, but why would someone go there specifically?" The question felt wrong somehow, like he was fishing for information rather than expressing genuine confusion. I found myself studying his office more carefully, noticing details I'd missed before. The degrees on his wall were from schools I'd never heard him mention. The client files on his desk had labels written in handwriting that looked familiar but not quite right. Even his business cards, scattered next to his computer keyboard, seemed somehow off, like props in a stage production. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral, "can you walk me through your security protocols here? If someone wanted to steal client information, how would they do it?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of his chest. "Well, everything's password protected, of course. 2-factor authentication on the important accounts. We follow all the industry standards." I asked if he kept client passwords in any kind of shared system, if Bryn had access to sensitive information as his office manager. "Bryn handles scheduling and basic paperwork," he said. "Nothing financial. I mean, she knows some clients' names and contact information, but she doesn't have access to account details or anything like that." His voice had taken on a slightly defensive tone, like he was protecting her from an accusation I hadn't quite made. I nodded as if satisfied by his explanation, then asked if I could use his bathroom before driving home. The bathroom was down a short hallway behind his office, past a supply closet and a small break room with a coffee maker and mini refrigerator. As I walked back toward his office, I glanced into the break room and saw something that made me stop. On the small table next to the coffee maker was a stack of mail, personal letters mixed with business correspondence. The top envelope was addressed to Marcus Hartwell at a P.O. box in Tempe, not his office address in Chandler. I memorized the P.O. box number and returned to his office, where Marcus was shuffling through papers with more energy than seemed necessary. "Find everything okay?" he asked without looking up. I told him yes, and thanked him for his time. promising to keep him updated on the investigation. As I walked toward the elevator, I could feel him watching me through his glass door, though when I turned around, he was apparently absorbed in his computer screen. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a yellow legal pad, writing down everything I knew and everything I suspected. The timeline, the technical details, the IP addresses, the backup email that used Bryn's name but seemed too sophisticated for her to create. At the top of the page, I wrote 2 questions: who had the knowledge and who had the opportunity? Under knowledge, I listed computer skills, understanding of investment accounts, familiarity with my personal information. Under opportunity, I wrote down everyone who knew about the college fund and had regular access to computers and internet. Both lists led to the same conclusion, one I'd been avoiding since the moment I saw that $127 balance. The theft wasn't random. It wasn't some stranger who'd somehow acquired my personal information. It was someone close enough to know intimate details about my life, sophisticated enough to execute a long-term plan, and desperate enough to steal from their own family member's child. Someone who'd been sitting across from me just hours ago, expressing concern and offering help while knowing exactly where Camden's college money had gone. I picked up my phone to call Detective Morrison at the Phoenix Police Department, then set it down again. Once I made that call, once I filed an official report naming my suspicions, there would be no going back. Either I was about to discover that I'd been horribly wrong about the people I trusted most, or I was about to destroy my relationship with the only family I had left. The yellow legal pad stared back at me, covered in evidence I didn't want to believe, but couldn't ignore. Outside my apartment window, the sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Instead, I sat in the growing darkness, holding my phone and trying to find the courage to make a call that would change everything. Detective Sarah Morrison met me at the Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit the next morning, a compact woman with graying hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested she'd heard every possible story about missing money. I handed her the folder of documents I'd assembled overnight: bank statements, transaction histories, screenshots of account changes, and my handwritten timeline of events. She spread everything across her desk methodically, asking clarifying questions as she reviewed each piece of evidence. "The backup email address is the smoking gun," she said after 20 minutes of silent reading. "BrynHartwell.consulting. That's not random. Someone was either trying to frame your sister or your sister was involved." She looked up from the papers. "You mentioned she's married to a financial advisor. Does he have access to her personal information? Social security number, passwords, that sort of thing?" I told her that married couples typically shared that kind of information, but that Marcus had seemed genuinely shocked when I'd told them about the theft. Detective Morrison made notes on a yellow pad similar to the one I'd used the night before. "I've seen this pattern before. Family member sets up unauthorized access, then uses that access gradually over time to avoid detection. The sophistication suggests professional knowledge of financial systems." She paused, tapping her pen against the desk. "But there's another possibility. Your sister could be a victim too. Someone could have stolen her identity to make it look like she was involved." That afternoon, Detective Morrison called with an update that made my hands shake as I held the phone. "We executed a search warrant for the email account this morning. BrynHartwell.consulting was created using your sister's social security number and date of birth, but the recovery phone number belongs to a prepaid cell phone purchased with cash in Tempe." She paused. "The credit card used to buy that phone was in your brother-in-law." I sat down heavily in my office chair, staring out the window at the parking lot, where normal people were living normal lives, while my world collapsed around me. "So Marcus bought the phone that was used to steal the money from Camden's account." Detective Morrison confirmed that was correct, then added something that made everything. "We also found evidence that this email account was used to access other investment." "Ms. Hartwell, I need to ask you something difficult. Have you ever given our brother-in-law access to client information from your job?" The question hit me like cold water. 6 months ago, Marcus had mentioned struggling to find new clients for his consulting. I'd casually mentioned that my firm worked with retirees who might benefit from additional financial planning services. I'd even given him the names of 3 clients who'd expressed interest in diversifying their portfolios. Just names and general financial situations. Nothing confidential. Nothing that violated my professional ethics. "Why?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer would destroy me. "Because we found evidence that Marcus Hartwell has been operating an unauthorized investment scheme using elderly clients from multiple firms. The email account used to steal your nephew's college money was also used to create fraudulent investment accounts for at least 12 senior citizens." Detective Morrison's voice was carefully professional. "Ms. Hartwell, I need you to come in immediately. There are federal investigators who want to speak with you." The FBI field office in Phoenix occupied a nondescript building downtown, all glass and concrete that revealed nothing about the lives being destroyed inside. Special Agent Jennifer Kim, a woman about my age with wire-rimmed glasses and a navy suit, led me to a conference room where 3 other agents were waiting with boxes of documents and computer printouts. The table was covered with photographs that took me several seconds to recognize: elderly men and women smiling at cameras, holding certificates, or standing in front of houses they'd probably worked their entire lives to afford. "These are some of Marcus Hartwell's victims," Agent Kim said quietly. "Retirement accounts emptied, life savings invested in non-existent opportunities, Social Security checks diverted to accounts they never authorized." She slid a folder across the table. "Your name appears in his client acquisition notes. According to our investigation, you provided him with contact information for potential investors." I opened the folder with trembling hands and saw my own handwriting on sticky notes attached to copies of client files. "Mrs. Patterson, widowed, looking for income. Mr. Rodriguez, concerned about inflation. The Johnsons want to leave something for grandchildren." Information I'd shared innocently, trying to help Marcus build his business while potentially helping my clients find additional services. Information that had apparently been used to target vulnerable people for financial fraud. "I never gave him account numbers or Social Security numbers," I said, hearing how defensive I sounded. "Just general information about what they were looking for financially." Agent Kim nodded as if she'd expected that response. "We believe you were unwittingly providing him with leads. The actual fraud happened through sophisticated phishing emails and fake investment websites that he created specifically to target the people you mentioned." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of questions, forms, and the gradual realization that my professional reputation was about to be destroyed, along with my family relationships. Even though I hadn't knowingly participated in Marcus's scheme, I'd provided him with information that had led to elderly people losing their life savings. The 3 clients I'd mentioned by name had lost a combined $430,000. Mrs. Patterson, an 82-year-old widow, had been left with less than $5,000 in her checking account after believing she was investing in a guaranteed income program that Marcus had created using professional-looking documents and fake testimonials. "What about my sister?" I finally asked as the interview was winding down. "Is Bryn involved, or is she a victim too?" Agent Kim exchanged glances with her colleagues before answering. "We believe she knew about the college account theft and may have helped facilitate access to your personal information. But we don't have evidence that she knew about the larger fraud scheme involving the elderly victims." I drove home in a daze, my phone buzzing with missed calls from Marcus, Bryn, and Camden. The search warrants had apparently been executed while I was at the FBI office. Marcus and Bryn were in custody, their computers and financial records seized as evidence. Camden was staying with neighbors, confused and frightened about why police had searched his house and arrested his parents. The voicemail from Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who was watching him, broke my heart. "Sage, Camden keeps asking when you're coming to get him. He doesn't understand what's happening." That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to process the magnitude of what I'd learned. Marcus hadn't just stolen Camden's college money. He'd been running a sophisticated fraud operation that had destroyed the retirement security of at least 12 elderly people. Bryn had apparently helped him access my personal information to steal from the college account, though she might not have known about the larger scheme. And I had unknowingly provided him with leads that had resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses for vulnerable seniors. My phone rang at 8:30 p.m. Camden's number appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. "Aunt Sage?" His voice was small, confused, younger than his 17 years. "Mrs. Chen said my parents were arrested. She said you're the emergency contact and I'm supposed to stay with you until this gets sorted out." I told him I'd be there in 20 minutes to pick him up, that we'd figure everything out together. "Aunt Sage," he said just before hanging up, "what happened to my college money? Mom always said you were taking care of it." I sat in my car outside Mrs. Chen's house for several minutes before going to the door, trying to find words to explain to a 17-year-old boy that his college fund was gone, his parents were criminals, and his future had been stolen by the people he trusted most. Through the living room window, I could see him sitting on the couch with a duffel bag at his feet, waiting for me to rescue him from a situation I had no power to fix. The only thing I could offer him was the truth, and the truth was going to shatter what remained of his childhood. Camden moved into my spare bedroom with nothing but the duffel bag Mrs. Chen had helped him pack, and a bewildered expression that reminded me painfully of Bryn at 19, suddenly orphaned and looking to me for answers I didn't have. He sat at my kitchen table that first morning, mechanically eating cereal, while I tried to explain what had happened to his parents and his college fund. "So the money you put away for me is just gone?" he asked, his voice flat and emotionless. And my dad stole from old people? I confirmed both facts, watching him process information that would have been difficult for an adult to understand. The media attention started within days. Local financial advisor charged in elder fraud scheme ran on the front page of the Arizona Republic, complete with Marcus's professional headshot and a photo of their house with crime scene tape across the front door. My name appeared in the third paragraph as someone who had provided client information to the accused. By the end of the week, I'd received calls from 5 different reporters, 3 attorneys representing elderly victims, and my boss requesting an immediate meeting to discuss my involvement in the Hartwell investigation. Margaret Stevenson, the managing partner at Phoenix Wealth Management, had been my mentor for 8 years. She taught me how to read market trends, how to communicate complex financial concepts to nervous clients, and how to build the kind of trust that kept families working with the same advisor for decades. Now she sat across from her conference room table, looking at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into her office by mistake. "Sage, I've known you since you were a junior analyst," she said carefully. "I've watched you build relationships with clients based on genuine care for their financial. Help me understand." I explained the innocent nature of my conversations with Mark, how I'd mentioned general client situations without providing a social security number. Margaret listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pen. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked directly at me. "The FBI contacted our compliance department yesterday. 3 of our clients lost their retirement savings because someone used information that could only have come from you." She paused, words carefully. "Even if you didn't intend for this to happen, our liability insurance doesn't cover losses that result from employee action." The meeting lasted 2 hours and ended with my resignation, effective immediately. I would receive 2 weeks severance pay and continuation of health insurance for 1 month. In return, I would agree not to discuss the circumstances of my departure with current clients or competitors. Margaret walked me to my office to collect personalized. Security guard waited in. 8 years of building professional relationships, gone in a single afternoon because I'd trusted my brother-in-law. Camden was waiting in the apartment, hunched over his laptop. He looked up when I entered, his expression a mixture of hope and dread. "I've been researching student loans," he said. "Maybe I can still go to college if I borrow every. Arizona State costs about $30,000 per year for in-state students. If I work part-time and live cheaply, maybe I can make it work." I sat down beside him, looking at the spreadsheets he'd created to calculate loan payments and projected earnings. His optimism was heartbreaking and completely unrealistic. "Camden," I said gently, "student loans require a co-signer with good credit and stable income. Your parents won't be able to sign for you, and I just lost my job." His face fell as he processed this new obstacle. "So I can't go to college at all?" I told him we'd figure something out, that this was just a temporary setback, but privately I wondered how. Even if I found new employment quickly, my association with the Hartwell case would make me toxic to most financial services firms, and Camden couldn't wait years for me to rebuild my career. The preliminary hearing for Marcus and Bryn was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I sat in the gallery of the Maricopa County Courthouse, watching my sister and brother-in-law appear in orange jumpsuits with their hands shackled in front of them. Marcus looked older than his 35 years, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something hollow and defeated. Bryn kept turning around to scan the courtroom, her eyes finding mine with an expression I couldn't interpret. Relief? Guilt? A silent plea for forgiveness I wasn't ready to give? The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wells, outlined the charges against them. Marcus faced 14 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of identity theft, and 1 count of operating an unlicensed investment scheme. The estimated losses exceeded $800,000, with victims ranging in age from 67 to 89. Bryn faced 4 counts of conspiracy and 1 count of computer fraud related to the unauthorized access of my investment accounts. Her bail was set at $50,000. Marcus's was set at $200,000. After the hearing, Bryn's court-appointed attorney approached me in the courthouse hallway. David Reyes was younger than I'd expected, probably fresh out of law school and assigned to a case that was already making headlines. "Ms. Hartwell, I represent your sister Bryn. She'd like to speak with you if you're willing." I agreed to meet them in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom, though I wasn't sure what we could possibly say to each other. Bryn looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail that made her appear younger and more vulnerable. She sat across from me at a metal table while her attorney reviewed his notes. "Sage," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to know that I didn't understand what Marcus was doing with those elderly people. I knew about Camden's college account, and I'm sorry, but I didn't know about the rest of it." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but saw only exhaustion and genuine remorse. "You helped him steal from Camden's future," I said quietly. "You used my personal information to access accounts I'd set up for your son." How do you justify? Bryn's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. We were drowning financially. Marcus's business wasn't making enough money, and we had credit card debt from when Camden was sick as a baby. Marcus said you'd understand eventually, that you'd want to help Camden anyway. Her attorney interrupted to explain that Bryn had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's provided detailed information about Marcus's activities and the methods he used to access your accounts, he said. The FBI believes her cooperation will be valuable in recovering assets for the elderly victims. I asked how much of the stolen money could potentially be recovered. The answer was devastating. Less than $100,000 of the total $800,000 had been located in accounts that could be frozen. That evening, I called my own attorney, Richard Bennett, who specialized in professional liability cases. I needed to understand my potential legal exposure and whether the elderly victims could successfully sue me. Richard's assessment was grimly realistic. While I might not face criminal charges, I could definitely face civil litigation from victims seeking to recover their money from anyone in Marcus's scheme. Your professional liability might cover some of it, he said, but probably not. You should prepare for the possibility of significant judgments again. Camden was still awake when I returned to the apartment, sitting in the living room with textbooks spread around him. He was working on homework as if maintaining his grades still mattered, as if college remained a realistic possibility. How are Mom and Dad? He asked without looking up from his calculus problem. I told him about the hearing, about the charges they faced, and the likelihood of prison sentences. He nodded as if he'd expected as much, then asked the question I'd been dreading. Aunt Sage, what's going to happen to me? I sat down on the couch beside him, looking at the college brochures still scattered across my coffee table from when his future had seemed secure. I don't know, I admitted, but we'll figure it out together. You're not going through this alone. He closed his textbook and leaned back against the couch cushions, staring at the ceiling. All my friends are getting acceptance letters and planning dorm rooms. I can't even tell them why I'm not applying anywhere. The casual cruelty of teenage social dynamics, where his parents' crimes would make him an object of curiosity or pity, was just another layer of damage he'd have to navigate. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw a photo of Mrs. Patterson, the 82-year-old widow who'd lost her retirement savings to Marcus's scheme. The message read, "This is my grandmother. She trusted you. How do you sleep at night?" I showed the text to Camden, who read it silently before handing my phone back. "People are going to hate us for what Dad did," he said matter-of-factly. Even though we didn't know, his acceptance of collective punishment for crimes he hadn't committed broke something inside me that I wasn't sure could be repaired. The civil lawsuits began arriving 3 weeks after the criminal charges were filed. First came Mrs. Patterson's family, represented by a personal injury firm that specialized in elder abuse cases. Then, Mr. Rodriguez's son, demanding compensation for his father's lost pension. By the end of the month, I'd been named as a defendant in 7 separate cases, seeking a total of $340,000 in damages. Each legal notice felt like another weight added to a burden I could no longer carry, and my savings account dwindled rapidly as I paid retainer fees to attorneys who spoke in careful language about limiting exposure and negotiating settlements. Camden's guidance counselor, Mrs. Harper, called me at home on a Thursday evening to discuss his changed circumstances. She'd taught at Desert Ridge High School for 15 years and had seen students face various family crises. But the Hartwell case was apparently unprecedented in its scope and media attention. "Camden's grades are holding steady," she said, "but he's withdrawn from extracurricular activities and seems isolated from his peer group. The other students know about his father's arrest. Some are cruel about it." I asked what she meant by cruel, and Mrs. Harper hesitated before explaining that someone had created a fake social media account called Fraud Family Updates that posted memes about Camden's situation, photos of expensive cars with captions like, "Bought with your grandma's retirement money," screenshots of news articles with Camden's school photo circled in red. "We've reported the account to the platform, but new ones keep appearing," she said. Teenagers can be remarkably creative in their cruelty. The financial pressure was becoming unbearable. Without my job at Phoenix Wealth Management, I had no steady income, and my professional reputation made finding new employment nearly impossible. 2 interviews with smaller firms had ended abruptly when the hiring managers Googled my name and discovered my connection to the Hartwell investigation. My unemployment benefits covered basic living expenses, but legal fees were consuming my savings at an alarming rate. I'd already spent $18,000 on attorneys, and the civil cases hadn't even reached the discovery phase. Camden noticed my stress, though I tried to hide it from him. He started eating smaller portions at dinner, claiming he wasn't hungry, and mentioned that he'd applied for a part-time job at a grocery store near the school. "I can help with expenses," he said one evening as we sat at the kitchen table, both of us pretending to read while thinking about problems that seemed insurmountable. Maybe I should look into community college instead of ASU. It's cheaper, and I could work more hours. The suggestion broke my heart because it was so reasonable and so devastating. Camden had maintained a 3.8 GPA throughout high school, participated in academic clubs, and dreamed of studying engineering since middle school. Community college wasn't necessarily a bad choice, but it represented the death of plans we'd made together when his future seemed secure. Let's not make any decisions yet, I told him. Things might change. But privately, I couldn't see how they would change for the better. The federal trial preparation consumed months of my life. FBI agents interviewed me repeatedly about my conversations with Marcus, requesting detailed timelines and documentation of every interaction we'd had regarding client information. Special Agent Kim became a regular presence in my life, calling weekly with new questions about Marcus's business practices or requests for additional records. "We're building a comprehensive case," she explained during one particularly lengthy interview. "Your testimony will be crucial in establishing how he acquired victim information." Marcus's attorney contacted me through Richard Bennett, requesting a meeting to discuss potential plea negotiations. Apparently, Marcus was willing to admit guilt to reduce charges in exchange for providing information about other financial advisors who might be operating similar schemes. "He claims there's a network of professionals sharing client leads," Richard explained. "The FBI is very interested in expanding their investigation." I refused to meet with Marcus's attorney, unwilling to be drawn deeper into a case that had already destroyed my career and financial stability. Bryn's situation was more complicated. Her cooperation with federal investigators had resulted in a plea agreement for 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. She would be required to pay restitution to the elderly victims, though her financial resources were limited to whatever could be recovered from their seized assets. Her attorney had suggested that a letter of support from me might influence the judge toward the lower end of the sentencing guideline. "I can't write that letter," I told Camden when he asked me to help his mother. "She betrayed my trust and stole money I'd saved for your education. I understand she's your mom, but I can't pretend that what she did was forgivable." Camden nodded sadly, understanding the position I was in, even as it clearly hurt him. "Will you at least come to her sentencing?" he asked. "She's still my mom, and I want her to see that our family isn't completely broken." The media attention intensified as Marcus's trial date approached. A local television station had produced a 3-part investigative series called The Trust Betrayer, featuring interviews with elderly victims and their families. My photo appeared in the segments about how Marcus had acquired client information, always with the disclaimer that I hadn't been charged with any crimes, but had provided leads that resulted in substantial losses. The courthouse steps interview with Mrs. Patterson's grandson, demanding that I be held accountable for my role in his grandmother's financial ruin, played repeatedly on local news broadcasts. I stopped going to the grocery store during peak hours after being recognized by a clerk who made loud comments about people who help steal from grandparents. Camden faced similar recognition at school, where teachers looked at him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. His calculus teacher, Mr. Williams, had pulled him aside to ask if he was comfortable continuing in advanced placement classes given his family situation. The implication that academic success was somehow inappropriate for the son of criminals added another layer of humiliation to Camden's daily existence. The apartment felt increasingly like a prison as autumn turned to winter. I'd been out of work for 6 months and my savings were nearly exhausted. The civil lawsuits were progressing slowly through the court system, but my attorneys warned that settlements or judgments could easily exceed $200,000. Camden had been accepted to 3 universities before his father's arrest, but without financial aid or family support, college remained an impossible dream. We existed in a strange limbo, waiting for legal proceedings to conclude, while our lives slowly collapsed around us. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in February, when I received notice that Mrs. Patterson had died. According to her family's attorney, the stress of losing her retirement savings had contributed to a series of health problems that culminated in a heart attack. The wrongful death lawsuit that followed named me as a defendant alongside Marcus and several other parties, seeking damages that could exceed $500,000. I sat in my living room, holding the legal papers and understanding finally that my old life was over. Whatever emerged from this wreckage would have to be built from nothing, with resources I no longer possessed and a reputation that might never recover. Camden found me there an hour later, still holding the lawsuit papers and staring at the wall. "Aunt Sage," he said quietly, sitting down beside me on the couch, "we're going to be okay. I don't know how, but we are." His certainty surprised me, coming from a 17-year-old who'd lost everything he'd ever counted on. "How can you be so sure?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment before answering. Because we're still here. We're still fighting. And we still have each other. The wrongful death lawsuit changed everything, but not in the way I'd expected. Mrs. Patterson's family attorney, Jonathan Mills, called me 3 days after filing the papers to request a meeting that had nothing to do with litigation strategy. Mrs. Patterson left behind some personal documents that mention you specifically, he said. I think you should see them before we proceed with any legal action. I agreed to meet him at his office, though I couldn't imagine what an elderly woman I'd never met personally might have written about me. Mills was older than I'd expected, probably in his 60s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested decades of difficult conversations with grieving families. He led me to a conference room where a manila folder waited on the polished table. Eleanor Patterson was a retired school teacher, he explained as I sat down. She kept detailed records of everything, including her interactions with Marcus Hartwell and her research into his background. He opened the folder and removed several handwritten pages covered in neat, teacher-like penmanship. She started investigating Marcus after her first investment lost money, Mills continued. Eleanor was sharper than he gave her credit for. She discovered that he was using information about potential victims that came from someone at Phoenix Wealth Management. He handed me a sheet of paper covered in Eleanor's careful notes. At the top, she'd written, Sage Hartwell, victim or accomplice. Below that were bullet points analyzing my background, my employment history, and my family relationships. I read Eleanor's notes with growing amazement. She'd somehow discovered that I was Camden's aunt, that I'd lost my parents young, and that I'd been supporting my sister's family for years. She looks like another victim, Eleanor had written. Young woman probably being manipulated by family member. Same pattern as my grandson's situation with his gambling addiction. Family members who enabled destructive behavior without realizing the scope of the problem. Mills watched me read, then handed me another document that made my hands shake. It was a copy of a letter Eleanor had mailed to the FBI a week before her death. Special Agent Kim, it began. I believe Sage Hartwell is being unfairly targeted in the prosecution of Marcus Hartwell. Based on my research into her background and character, I believe she was manipulated by her brother-in-law in the same way that I was manipulated by him. She should be treated as a victim, not an accomplice. Eleanor sent similar letters to the district attorney's office and to the attorneys representing the other elderly victims, Mills explained. She was organizing the other victims to focus their legal action on Marcus and exclude you from civil liability. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Eleanor Patterson died believing that you were as much a victim of Marcus Hartwell as she was. Her family has decided to honor that belief by dropping the wrongful death suit against you. I walked out of Mills's office in a daze, carrying copies of Eleanor's research and her final letter to the FBI. Her investigation had been more thorough than anything the federal agents had compiled, complete with bank records showing Marcus's pattern of targeting family members of potential victims. She'd identified 3 other cases where Marcus had cultivated relationships with financial professionals specifically to gain access to client information. I wasn't his first target. I was part of a systematic strategy he'd been using for years. Special Agent Kim called me that evening after receiving copies of Eleanor's materials from Mills. This changes our understanding of your role significantly, she said. Mrs. Patterson's research shows that Marcus specifically targeted you because of your access to elderly clients and your family relationship with him. We'd like you to consider testifying for the prosecution instead of just providing background information. The idea of testifying against Marcus felt like another betrayal of my sister, but I agreed to meet with the prosecutors to discuss what my testimony might accomplish. Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Wells explained that my perspective as both a victim and an unwitting participant could help the jury understand how sophisticated Marcus's manipulation had been. Elderly victims will see that you were deceived in the same way they were, she said. Your testimony humanizes the case and shows the jury how predators exploit trust relationships. Camden's reaction to Eleanor Patterson's letter surprised me. She sounds like she was an amazing person, he said after reading her notes about my character. I wish I could have met her. I told him that Eleanor's death was still partially my fault, regardless of her final conclusions about my culpability. Aunt Sage, he said quietly, you can't save everyone, but you can honor the people who believed in you by doing something positive with your life. The prosecutors offered me immunity from federal charges in exchange for my testimony, along with a letter of recommendation that would help me rebuild my professional reputation after the trial concluded. More importantly, they suggested that my cooperation might result in additional asset recovery that could benefit both the elderly victims and Camden's education fund. Marcus hid money in offshore accounts, Wells explained. Your testimony about his methods might help us locate those assets. Marcus's trial began in September, almost exactly 1 year after I discovered the missing money in Camden's college account. I testified for 2 days, describing my relationship with Marcus, the client information I'd shared with him, and the way he'd gradually gained access to my personal financial details. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a willing participant, but Eleanor Patterson's research had provided prosecutors with ammunition to counter those arguments effectively. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding Marcus guilty on all 14 counts of wire fraud and 3 counts of identity theft. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month, with prosecutors recommending 12 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release and mandatory restitution to victims. Bryn had already been sentenced to 18 months and was serving her time at a minimum security facility in Arizona where Camden could visit her monthly. The asset recovery process yielded unexpected results. Federal investigators had located $340,000 in accounts Marcus had hidden using fake business entities, enough to provide partial restitution to most of the elderly victims. Additionally, the sale of Marcus and Bryn's house and personal property generated another $180,000 for victim compensation. Camden would receive $89,000 to replace his stolen college fund, enough to cover most of his expenses at Arizona State University. I found work at a small financial planning firm in Flagstaff, 2 hours north of Phoenix, where the owner had followed the trial coverage and believed in my version of events. Sarah Chen specialized in helping families recover from financial crises, and she thought my experience with the Hartwell case would help me connect with clients who'd been betrayed by trusted advisors. "You understand what it feels like to have your trust violated," she said during my interview. "That's valuable expertise in this business." Camden started college in January, 6 months later than originally planned, but with a renewed appreciation for the opportunity. He'd chosen to study criminal justice instead of engineering, inspired by the investigators who'd worked to recover the stolen money and hold Marcus accountable. "I want to help people who've been victims of financial crimes," he explained. "Maybe I can prevent other families from going through what we went through." The civil lawsuits were eventually settled for amounts much smaller than originally demanded, thanks largely to Eleanor Patterson's research and the prosecutor's confirmation that I'd been manipulated rather than complicit. I paid $35,000 total to resolve all claims, money I borrowed against my future earnings but could realistically repay over several years. The elderly victims received substantial compensation from the recovered assets, and several of them had written letters thanking me for testifying against Marcus. Bryn and I speak monthly now, cautious conversations that focus mainly on Camden's progress in school and her plans for rebuilding her life after release. She's enrolled in accounting courses through the prison education program and has expressed interest in working with nonprofits that help families in financial crisis. "I want to undo some of the damage I helped cause," she told me during her last phone call. "I know I can't fix everything, but maybe I can prevent other people from making the same mistakes." Camden graduated summa cum laude from ASU's criminal justice program and now works for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, the same department that investigated his father's case. He keeps a photo of Eleanor Patterson on his desk, along with her handwritten notes about second chances and the importance of learning from family failures. "She saved our family," he told me when he got the job. "The least I can do is spend my career helping people like her." The betrayal that destroyed my old life ultimately led to something more meaningful than what I'd lost. I work with families who've been devastated by financial fraud, helping them rebuild not just their bank accounts, but their ability to trust again. Camden and I are closer than we ever were before the crisis, bonded by shared trauma and the knowledge that we survived something that could have destroyed us completely. And sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing case files for clients who've been cheated by people they trusted, I think about Eleanor Patterson's final letter and her belief that redemption is possible for anyone willing to learn from their mistakes and use that knowledge to help others.